Cathy Lhamo. I'm not always here teaching, but it's really always an honor to be here when I get to teach. I often work weekends, so I usually say no. But this weekend, our main teacher, resident teacher, Lama Cathy, is in upstate New York. And I believe some of the other meditation instructors that teach on Sunday are out of town. So you're stuck with me, I'm so sorry. So today's topic is going to be about how to embrace suffering as our path. But first, we need to sort of get a little merit running here. So we often start with a prayer. So I thought we could do two prayers quickly. First will be the prayer on the placard. It's called the Refuge Prayer. And this is a prayer all of us memorize after we become Buddhist. And you don't have to be a Buddhist to do these prayers. But if you do look at them, please don't put it flat on the floor, just on a cushion might be nice, because they are considered sacred. Thank you. And normally we put our hands in prayer mudra, which is sort of like we have a little gem in our hands. But if you're holding this, you really can't do both. So then we do the half version. So whatever you do is just fine. So let's begin. Don't worry how you sound. I'll hit the note first. Om Sanjay Chudan Soki Chodam La Jan Chu Bardu Dani Gyapsu Chi Dagi Ginsok Kipe Sonam Ki Drola Penchir Sanjay Drupar Shok. Again. Sanjay Chudan Soki Chodam La Jan Chu Bardu Dani Kyatsu Chi Dagi Ginsok Kipe Sonam Ki Drola Penchir Sanjay Drupar Shok. And in English, and the Buddha, the Dharma, and the assembly most excellent, I take refuge until I reach enlightenment. By the merit of generosity and other good deeds, may I achieve enlightenment for the sake of all beings. And now, in order to remove any obstacles to your day, to your life, to your work, whatever you do, this next prayer is paying homage to various blessings from the Buddha. And we are going to actually do this in Tibetan since that's how it was written. And this is called this is on page 34. This is called the Tashi prayer. Tashi means may things be auspicious. May they be wondrous. It's also called the verses of the 8 noble auspicious ones because there's different groups of special beings we're praying to. So are you all there? Okay. This will go a little faster. Om Namsi Nanda Ranshi Lundupe Dashi Joju Shina Chupaye Sanje Churangendu Pabetsok Kunla Chatsa Da Chatra Shishok Drenvi Gyalpo Saden Dendrugom Jampi Gamba Geja Padamba Kunla Gompo Gyache Drapa Chen Lumpo Dapa Tsa Drapa Dani Sem Chen Tanje Lago Drape Pal Yitzin Se Pal Tsa Ra Drapa De Sen San Tu Pedrashi Pal Pal Wa Dewa Shepad Yela Chatsalo Jamba Shunu Baden Dorje Zin Chenre Sig Wangombo Jampe Pel Sahi Nimbo Dripa Namba Sal Nam Ki Nimbo Bajo Kondu Zan Upa Dorje Bekar Lunshin Dan No Buddha Waraldini Mai Jatsen Lek Nam Drashi Paugi Jod Janju Samba Yel Chatsalo rinchen du cho trashi seginya, du jambon zayi kamala, nendra du dampon so pelbeu, minu gyatsen wan your porlote, rinchen da cho keki jatsen chen, cho du gyawa cho jingege ma. Kekso ngowo jumbe pel belwe, jashi lamo gela chatsalo, sampa chembo jejun se mebu, mi ton den dan yao po yu gorsong, pa ke bo dan lukwa mik mi sam, na tu se de la ze gorlo dan, Trisula dan du tu do che chen, pi wang rel di chu den ya zen zin, sa su ne su ge le tra shi pel, jit din kyung wa ye la cha sa lo, da cha din dir ja wa samba la, gek da ne wa se wa kun shi ne, du ba ba sam du yi shi du, ta shi de le pon sun so par shog. Let's just have a moment of silence. Thank you, everyone. You can, if you want, if it's too hard for you to have that there, I think you're okay. You can just put it on your chairs, right? Good. So let's just do a little bit of logistics here. If you ever need to get up and take a break during this talk, or if this is too much, I'm in no way offended. And we also are human, so sometimes we need a bathroom break. Also, if you're brand new and you've never been to the classes here, we have an ongoing class right at this moment downstairs, and you could just plug into that. So I just wanted to make sure that you all know that. So I'm just curious, how many people here have taken refuge? They've become Buddhist? Okay, great. How many people are almost brand new? Great. So have any of you never been here for a talk before? Okay, great. So the way it works is I'm going to speak on a topic, and normally Q&A is done a little bit towards the end, because I'm always scared to death what you're going to ask. No, I'm joking. That's normally how it is. And we have a microphone here. So, but if you have a real pressing question, you could just raise your hand, and if I see you, I'll answer from during the middle of the talk. So most of you now have, since you've been at the center, many of you have already become Buddhist. Some of you I recognize been here for a very long time. And so you're familiar with the teachings of the Buddha, of what he taught initially. And the very first thing of the Four Noble Truths he taught was that we all suffer. It's called the truth of suffering. And yet some people go, oh, those Buddhists, they're real downers. They're really into the suffering thing. It's actually just a fact check that we're in the human body and we're not going to be here forever. And it's something most of us never really want to explore. Because especially with the society where we live in such affluence that how many of you even take a bus? Not many. How many of you rub elbows with people of all different demographics? Great. Because some people just live in this little bubble, so they're not aware of any other suffering but their own. And as a Buddhist, the main thing we do in all of our prayers, everything we do, and today we will do it at the end of this class, we will offer all of the merit of you spending your time here, of you trying to understand what I'm saying, of you just opening your heart up. We offer all of that up for those that are suffering. And everything around, we try to develop the heart of awakening called bodhicitta, which later leads, and it's a very well-defined pathway, all the instruction on how to awaken. And when we are awakened, we become Buddhas. And what do Buddhas do? They help remove suffering, or they help soothe all of us when we are suffering, because we are in a human realm. And in this realm, we have our own little type of suffering. And most of you are familiar with it, but you might not know some of it was suffering. Birth, the suffering of sickness, old age, and death. But we have a few more, and these are my favorite. The suffering of change. How many of you like change? Okay, thank you. I'm in the right neighborhood here. And the other two, which are my very favorite, the suffering of not getting what you want, and the suffering of the other flip side, getting what you absolutely do not want. And that was me this week. So I'm going to go real personal here. I was going to teach, because this is March, on famous Buddhist women this week. But my husband had hip surgery on Monday, and he did not go home on Monday or Tuesday. And he's now in a rehab facility, and he's doing fine now. But even though I have been around so many teachings for 35 years, I had to really stand back and not react, because my husband immediately knew when they said, you might have to go to a facility part-time for a little while. He immediately just could tell by my body language I was absolutely freaking out. And I tried to remain calm with all the hospital staff, because they knew I worked as a chaplain over in the main hospital, but I couldn't help it. I finally sort of I didn't have a breakdown, but I was afraid for him, because I'm very attached to my husband. I'm not so attached to clothes, obviously, or jewelry, but I'm attached to my relationships and my love for him, because he's very kind to me. Have any of you in this room ever undergone any kind of loss? Any of you physically had any challenges? So over time, with our practices, you're going to be introduced to ways that you should still have your treatments, your physical therapy, your medications, whatever it is to keep you strong. But we start changing our minds. We have a type of mind training that's very powerful, so that in the middle of that strife, of that change, where we have no idea what the outcome will be, we have a very calm, serene mind. We're content, actually, with everything that is flying around us. You learn to become content in all situations. You're not in denial at all. In fact, you're almost more hyper-aware. But you become aware of how you are, how everyone in the room is, who is it that you really could be helping at that moment. And I think that's something that we don't talk a lot about in our culture. And we all do suffer. So I didn't want to carry all my stuff today, so I put some of my notes on my phone. I took a picture of it. So, and one thing that I have noticed, being around Buddhism for so many years, we don't do it consciously, but we do it. People think, if I do yoga, I love yoga, so I'm not making fun. If I do meditation, I'll never get sick. I have heard so many people say that. I have heard people say to me, how is it that you had a stroke years ago? You were a practitioner. What's wrong with your practice? Then when I was a little older, something else happened. Same thing, people really came down on me. And so I did what a practitioner does. We go to our teachers and say, what am I doing wrong? And I thought I would share a few of those stories for a moment. I'm sorry it's so personal today, but I don't usually get very emotional, but I think I should share this time with you. When I was very young, maybe not even 40, I had a physical therapy manipulation that caused me to have a full stroke. And there I was, I had lost all that weight. I was looking so darn good. And suddenly I couldn't walk, nothing worked. I had to go to a rehab facility for a month. At Ohio State, it was marvelous. And so after I got out of that, even before that, my teachers were called. Lhamo Cathy helped me call my teachers. And Khenpo Rinpoche said, just get whatever you need from there And remember that all of this is impermanent. Everything changes. Get strong, but don't be so attached to always being so healthy. I'm just kind of like, whoa. Then later, when I got stronger, but still not 100%, I loved when my husband used to quietly tell people on the phone my percentage. I freaked out when he said 85 once. What do you mean I'm 85% real? I remember going to Tai Situ Rinpoche. He's a very high teacher. And I was at a program, and I kind of went on, and he said, you're really whining about yourself. You're supposed to be thinking about all sentient beings and using this opportunity of suffering to understand that everyone goes through this, not just you. It's not all about you, Cathy. And I'm like, and then afterwards, he said, was I too strong on that? I'm like, yeah. And he said, that's what I wanted to do. I want you to wake up to realize, and I mean, I've read in all the books, all of this, but when it's you, it's a little different. Then maybe half a year later, I met Tengar Rinpoche, who's a very famous teacher, but he was really unique. He was old school Tibetan, had the biggest heart I've ever met, just so compassionate. He had very severe diabetes his whole life. And at a certain stage, he would go to the hospital saying, what do you need now? He didn't have an eye. He didn't have part of an arm, part of his leg. He didn't care. He just kept teaching, kept practicing. So when I met him, I didn't know any of this. I sort of gave him my sad story. And he said, come over here. And he shook my hand. He said, I'm so happy for you. And I'm thinking, you're happy that I had this major brainstem stroke? He said, yes, because now maybe you'll start practicing. Maybe now you understand what's really important in your life. And so I can tell you so many teachers did the same thing to me. So many congratulated me. And they told me it was really wonderful because I had the karma to get past it. Probably because of their blessings. I have so many blessings from so many people. But you, whatever you suffer from, take it upon yourself, even if it's a little uncomfortable. And Lama Cathy can teach you much better instructions than I am right now. I'm just giving you a slight overview. But it's called sending and receiving, sending people your strengths and taking on any of their suffering. And in the beginning, that might be very uncomfortable. But one thing you can do when you're at home and you're praying that you get well, also include them. If you're doing medicine Buddha practice because you need it for healing, always remember, even during this practice, you're getting great benefit and blessings. Remember, the entire world suffers. The entire universe suffers. People not only suffer from what you're suffering from, they suffer from starvation, from ignorance, incredible poverty, war, like we would never understand, displacement, emotional problems, very serious mental disabilities. Some of us might have that, but many of us don't. So whenever you're doing a practice, or if you're on a bus, or if you're somewhere and you see somebody very disabled, send all your love to them. And remember to send prayers for them that their suffering one day may be relieved. It is said that we are here now because of the prayers of others. So I want you to always keep in mind how important it is what you do with your mind. Do you want to just sit at home and worry about what you're going to buy next on Amazon? Or watch TV, get very comfortable, eat your cozy foods, go to your nice restaurants, whatever you do. But if your entire life is around that, then you might as well just leave right now, because that's not what Buddhism is. Buddhism is really about the work, getting down to the work of getting close to things that are uncomfortable for us and offering everything for every living being. Well, Cathy, what if I'm not very good at that? It doesn't matter. Start where you are and not worry about that, because we need to get close to suffering. We need to embrace that. Does anyone have a question? Okay. We need to really realize that this is the nature of our realm as human beings. And so some of you now in this room can look at me and say, okay, she probably suffers from old age. I do. And I can't tell all of you because many of you are very young still. But some of us do suffer from old age. We slow down. We don't make as much money. We don't eat as much. We have a hard time getting up and down, or maybe being as active. But hopefully, if we practiced before this, we've laid down the habit of meditation practice, then at this stage is fine. We know how to accept things. Well, what if you're just starting out and you're 90 years old? Well, you just start wherever you are. My husband sometimes is a source of great inspiration. Right now, he's on a unit that they say it's rehab, but there's several patients there that have severe dementia. And they all love my husband, no matter what. People always, he kind of looks like Santa Claus. And even with their dementia, even though you might think they don't know, they know they're suffering. And I've never been in a facility before. I worked in a hospital. I don't work around how it's going to look when I get older. And it's very sobering, I must say. But I just thought I would read a couple of things to you from a wonderful book that Lhamo Cathy, I would say this is her Buddhist Bible. Have any of you studied this with Lhamo Cathy? She studies with a lot of people on the telephone. In the old days, she used to do a lot of courses on it. I think we need to get her to do a nice weekend here on this. She teaches people all over the world on this book. This book is based on the 7 points of a mind training. Over the years, you will find various Buddhist books. Some are words of the Buddha called sutras. Some are commentaries on certain meditations. This is what I would call a nice, tiny little handy book on how to deal with life. And primarily, it's all about suffering and how to embrace it, how to work with it, and how to develop that heart of compassion, which is so important. So I thought I would just read a couple. This is the newer version. My old one was kind of falling apart, so I grabbed this one. And I was going to give the other one away, but I can't because I need to put the notes in here. But it's very well organized, and I should talk about the authors. So the first author is Atisha. He was born around 1100 current era in Tibet. And then he and a group of monks at that time were starting to try and work out practical manuals. Yes. It's the Great Path. Thank you for asking. The Great Path of Awakening. I'm just showing it. I forgot. I'm so sorry, everyone online. It's called The Great Path of Awakening. And the subtitle is The Classic Guide to Lojong, which is mind training, a Tibetan Buddhist practice for cultivating the heart of compassion. It says it's by Jama Control, because this is called a commentary. But the root text is the 7 Points of Mind Training by Lord Atisha, who lived around 1100. He was born then. And then Jama Control was born around, I think, 1750. So often there are commentaries. When Jama, the author of this commentary, was born, there was a push to start looking more at the practical material out there and get people to understand it more clearly. Because sometimes the main text might just be, just a few words or a few sentences. So he expanded this so that you have a full understanding of it. So I'm going to go over to one of the chapters that I thought I love some of these titles. And I thought I would share a few of these things with you. So I'm now on section 3. So the first few sections were all about how to develop bodhicitta, which is the heart of awakening. And the rest of the book is about that. But it was the basic technique of sending and receiving and how to connect with your gurus. But now I'm up to level 3, and this is my favorite title, Transformation of Adversity into the Path of Awakening. When misfortune fills the world and its inhabitants, make adversity the path of awakening. So here you're so I'll keep going a little bit. When your world is full of pain and suffering, when prosperity and wealth are diminished, troublesome people create difficulties in your life, etc., you must change the adverse conditions in which you find yourself into the path of awakening. So we do that with very different slogans. So this and another booklet that I just love And if you can't tell, I used to keep this in my purse. These are called the 37 Practices of Bodhisattva. And it's really what I Tibetan and Chinese and English and transliteration. And it's also a very similar type of thing. And this is given to me by Khenpo Tsultrim Gyamtso. He is a famous Lojong teacher, and he always said, whenever you're standing in line, which no one ever stands in line now, right? In the old days, when we would stand in line, he'd say, always read one of these verses. So I try and always apply that. But I thought I would go a little bit more into some of these sections. So the one I first went to, I was talking about the third section, transforming adversity into the path of awakening. And we talked about when your world is full of all those things, pain and suffering, and sometimes working with difficult people can be a really big category. There's 3 ways you can transform: by relying on bodhicitta, relative and ultimate, which we're not going to go into a whole lot right now, and special practices. And one of them I love, one of the slogans is, be grateful to everyone and everything. And that's something that I think we don't do enough of. And be grateful to your suffering. We're to treat suffering as a gift. I know that sounds really weird. You've not been trained that anywhere else except maybe in Buddhism. But we're to look at all of this as a teaching and a wonderful opportunity to awaken. Maybe the first time it's just way too rough and it's too close to the bone. That's no problem. I'm just kind of introducing to you today some of these concepts that might be too close. And if it is, then just do whatever practice you're doing and pray for others and not worry about this. But some of you might like to get a little bit more close and personal to your suffering. And I'm not talking about any weird stuff. I'm just talking about acknowledging, okay, last week I was very uncomfortable with some of the situations. How did I deal with it? I turned my phone off. I swear I did. Lhamo Cathy just texted me. Come on, I have everything turned off. Oh, well, if I hit airplane, doesn't that turn your phone off? Okay. Hello, Lhamo Cathy. I mentioned her. I thought this book was amazing. I forgot how great it is. She said, absolutely. So let's see, what was I talking about? So this week was interesting to suddenly realize sometimes I really think I have my shit together. I didn't. I was slightly a mess. I remember being in the hospital watching my husband, making sure he was breathing, because he was under so much sedation after that surgery. And I thought, it might be like this one day. I have to start becoming a little bit more realistic. One day, one of us might go into one of those facilities. It's interesting to go to one of those facilities and see all these people kind of looking like Barbie and Ken, but they're in their 80s. It's very interesting. So they have a very different life, But as a Buddhist, it is preferred that you just live a very simple life, especially as you get older. You give everything away, and you practice your butt off. Not seriously. You practice so much. So I'm hoping, several of us have talked about starting a Buddhist old folks home, a BAFA. Anyway, we're really trying to still get that together so that we could have a place to all practice together. But this is sort of that. We just don't live here. This book is so thorough, it even goes through what to do at death. And at our center, we have a lot of practices we do now to prepare when we leave our bodies, because we need to start talking about it now, not later. And if any of you are in your 70s, I hope you're starting to really embrace a lot of practices and go to Lhamo Cathy and others to help you to be more prepared towards your life, coming to a slight shift. So let's move on to some of the cool practices. Here are some special practices to do. The best way is to use the 4 practices. I really like this. The 4 practices towards becoming closer and more comfortable with suffering are accumulating merit, which is doing good, doing virtuous activity, confessing what you've done wrong, and then making offerings. and through all kinds of beings, to the spirits, to the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, to all living beings. And we have a lot of practices we do, and we can always share that with you. But here, moving on to how do you accumulate merit? Trungpa Rinpoche said for most people living in the city, just even to light lamps, electric, or like I have a lot of little tea lamps, but they're rechargeable. Just to offer lamps, not for your own enjoyment, but for those to dispel the darkness of their suffering. So you can kind of twist everything into being really kind of profound. So he talks about how do you gather merit? So you do it through the best of your ability, through physical, verbal, and mental activities. Physical, by doing prostrations, doing practices like nunes. It's wonderful to do it that way. To do circumambulation around our stupa outside. Stupa is full of relics. Just by walking around it in a, is it clockwise? Clockwise direction, you really gather and say a lot of prayers, you gather a lot of merit that way. Also, you can serve the community here. Many of you here serve. How many here are volunteers? Raise your hands higher. I'm old, I can't see everything. See how many people here volunteer. That's really wondrous. I offer your merit. And so by serving a community is very important. So what if you can't serve a community? Well, you can pay your dues. That's wonderful. Or you can just, I always love Buddhism because there's always sort of, what would I call it? Like an addendum. What if you can't afford to pay the dues? What if you physically can't be here to do that? Then what you do is you offer the merit of all the others that are doing that, and then you get even more merit. Does that make sense? It's kind of counterintuitive. So if I can't afford to come to the center or pay dues or to be a volunteer here, but if in my heart I thank those that are doing that and offer all of the goodness they have to the universe for others to remove their suffering, then I in turn gather that merit. So there's no way you can't get better with this. Then you can make different offerings to the Buddhas. You can make offerings to the community by serving, as many of you do. Some of you see our Mahakala practice, we offer either food or called Dharma substances. We offer candles. We make prostrations. I mentioned circumambulation. You take the refuge vow. And also you arouse bodhicitta and say certain prayers. This is an interesting little quote. If it is better for me to be ill, I pray for the blessing of illness. If it is better for me to recover, I pray for the blessing of recovery. If it is better for me to die and pass, I pray for the blessing of death. And then moving on in this book, there's some additional instructions that I really liked. I thought I would share. I have to keep an eye on the time. We're doing good. I know I marked this. Where is it? Here they are. So I just talked about those special 4 type of things that we can offer up. This is hard looking at a book I have not read because I have the older version. Trungpa Rinpoche and many of the Rinpoches talk about maybe your behavior. Maybe we should talk about that a lot. By meditating, how many people here actually meditate, have learned to meditate? Wonderful. Have you seen a change? Anyone seen a slight change, subtle change? You might be surprised over time that later on your meditation won't be how uncomfortable you are, but maybe some of you are doing the standard shamatha that we do here at 10 o'clock, but we have so many other practices. We do a great deal of deity practice. You see all of these deities behind me in order for Green Tar to remove fear, for Chenrezig, who has the 4 arms, to develop compassion and loving kindness, Medicine Buddha for healing. So if you find meditation is a little, you don't feel you're moving anywhere, talk to Lhamo Cathy or one of the mentors. We might have you dip your toes into another pool for a little bit. But But when you meditate, after a while, you become aware of how you work, you might say, how your mind works, and also your behavior, because how you behave and what you say is an extension of your mind. So we have to be careful not to hurt one another with our words and our actions. And that is something that is pretty serious. So that's another thing we try and work on. Especially our motivation is to help others. I forgot I wrote all over this book. I must have been in a class with Lhamo Cathy here on this book. Here we go. Then there's additional instructions from the transmission lineage. And I want to go through this. If medicine and nursing help you to think that the right treatment wasn't tried earlier, is to take the wrong attitude. Rather think, no one is free from this kind of affliction. Now, ego clinging, this is what you wanted, so be satisfied. So it's all about be aware of your mind. Don't think because, oh, I had this and now I'm cured, I'm not going to suffer anymore. That's not true. No one's going to get out of here alive. In addition, learn to take on illness and disturbances that trouble others. And here's some teachings. Flatten all thoughts. All remedies are weapons to strike with. Concentrate all plans into one, and all paths have one goal, which is to become awakened. These 4 teachings are enlightened remedies. Then moving on, and this is the part I really liked. Adverse conditions are spiritual friends. Spiritual friends are often called teachers. So many people consider, when you're sick, that it's a blessing from your teacher, especially if you get well. That's always nice. But it doesn't always happen. So it's hard for me sometimes to talk about teachers because I'm not sure, I know some people here have similar teachers. And even if your teacher, your guru has passed away from his body, his blessings are still there. His activity is still present. And so I just wanted some of you that were students of Khenpo Kartu Rinpoche or Barnard Toko Rinpoche, they are still actively working to help us as students. So adverse conditions are spiritual friends or teachers. Demons are emanations of victorious ones. Illness is the broom for evil and obscurations. Suffering is the dance of what is. I know this is a little esoteric. It's going to explain itself in a minute. These 4 teachings are for really disruptive emotions. You will need them to subdue the uncivilized. In these degenerate times, they are needed to cope with evil associates and mistaken practices. And here's the commentary. You don't have to avoid adverse conditions since they perform the function of a spiritual friend. By using adverse conditions, you can gather accumulations, clear away obscurations, be reminded of the teachings of the Buddha, and derive benefit from your understanding. There is no need to be frightened of visions and hallucinations associated with gods or demons, of the trouble that demons cause, because they will help to increase your faith and virtue. These are emanations of your guru and of Buddhas. So some people believe everything that happens to you is an emanation of your teacher. So this is more kind of a guru yoga instruction. So working at being joyful even while you're ill, since it is repeatedly said in the sutras that even a slight headache, to say nothing of a serious illness, is like a broom sweeping away dust, sweeping away our karma. Sickness clears away all the evil and obscurations gathered from beginningless time that we have incurred. So all my negativity is slowly being cleansed. How? It's not really by meditation, but by suffering and moving through that suffering. Meditation gives us the tools on how to deal with all of this. So sickness clears away all the evil and obscurations gathered from beginningless time. When suffering comes, if you just look at what it is, it arises as emptiness. Trungpa Rinpoche has said many times, when you're very sick, you're in pain, take a moment if you can, unless you're in too much pain, and ask yourself, who is it that's suffering? What is this pain? Is this real? So later on in your training, you'll be trained on how to sort of start resting in the nature of your mind. And when you do that, you're able to deal with some of these things that happen to you without so much drama. Sometimes you will still have great suffering, but sometimes the suffering is more the mind reacting to the pain of the body. So when suffering comes, if you just look at what it is, it arises as emptiness. So not all of you have had training yet in this, but you will over time. I'll say that again. When suffering comes, if you look at just what it is, and that means you just calm your mind for a moment and look straight at it, it arises as emptiness. However much you suffer, the suffering is just the dance of what it is, so you shouldn't be depressed. It's good if all these things happen, since they can be taken as aids to putting Dharma into practice. So they're all considered as tools. So the key point is not to avoid the instructions, but put them into practice. So I was wondering if, let me see if there was one other thing. Are there any other questions? Are there any questions, period? No. Sure, that would be great, thank you.
Well, thank you first for the teachings. I was wondering about, so with I can see this with my own, if I'm ill and doing this, but what about if I see somebody else who's suffering, like someone I love? Let's say my mother actually is old and is just went through hip surgery and all that. I don't want her to suffer. Like, I can't say, well, her suffering gets transformed into the path and clears away obstacles. Like, for me, it's just like, I don't want her to suffer.
That's a very, very good question. So for us, seeing other people suffering, especially someone we love, is the hardest. So we suffer. So number one, we have to completely realize, don't suffer. Give them great love and kindness and see what you can do to help them. Because if they're not practitioners, we can't tell them, oh, this is an illusion. Yeah, right. It's hard enough to even tell us that. So what you do is just need to be very kind to them, very loving, and try and find ways to alleviate that.
Okay, thank you.
Especially when people are sick. I'm glad you asked this question, and you can sit down. Because I work as a hospital chaplain, I'm around a lot of sickness. And when people are sick, they say the weirdest things. Their minds are, their body and their mind and their spirit and their emotions, everything is all tied together in pain. And you have to really not be offended what they say to you. Just step back and be there for them, even if it's without any words. 80 to 90% of how we communicate with another is not through words, but through our body language. So I mentioned my husband this week knew I was really freaking out. And I didn't say a word. I'm usually really mouthy. I was so good. But he still knew. He picked up. So when we're with our loved ones, you're just going to learn slowly how to be kind-hearted and do more meditation and do medicine Buddha if you wish. That's a very healing practice for us to become strong practice so that we have a strong body to practice. But it also is full of so many blessings. So I can give you more information on that after the end of the class. And I'm going to be teaching a class on that very soon, both in person and online. So it's a practice we do here, and it's a very powerful practice because it's a Buddha practice. And they say just hearing the mantra of Teata Om Bekanze Bekanze Maha Bekanze Raja Samugate Soha, or even seeing the form of medicine Buddha, because before he became a Buddha, he vowed if anyone saw his form or saw his mantra, his mantra is his name. If anyone saw that would relieve suffering. So you could take an image of that, unless it would be too weird. If she didn't like to see this blue Buddha, who's that blue guy over there? You just have to sort of tiptoe around that, but that's what I do in the hospital. So I don't, of course, most of my patients are probably Christian. And if they're Christian, then of course I honor whatever their background is. But at home, I'm praying for them in my style. Yeah. Thank you so much. That was a great question. Any other questions? Okay, so someone's gonna have to tell a joke so everyone isn't freaking out here. Go ahead. I'm sorry if it was kind of a downer class. All my classes are like this, though.
So I guess I've thought about sickness and suffering before, or I've heard that it's caused by previous accumulated negative karma.
It's that but not always. Sometimes there's group karma, like being in America, we all got COVID. You know, a lot of people got COVID, so that wasn't necessarily just your karma. And sometimes it might not truly be karma, but just an adventitious result of things coming together. But I interrupted you. I'm sorry. Keep going.
Well, I guess I would. So then, talking about suffering as kind of as the broom to brush away karma, like, are these two different ways to think about karma, or are these two things like working together somehow, or?
So the broom analogy is sort of a purification. It purifies the wrongdoing we did to others. So that's often, they say, I've talked to the Rinpoche several times on this, and they say they can't always tell you if you're suffering from karma or just circumstances, because there are both of those, and there's group karma. So I don't worry so much about it. I just try and do my practice, but it's a very good question. But by doing the practice, by not becoming so wound up in our ego, because the whole reason we're not Buddhas is because we value ourselves so much. So by practicing and meditating and praying for others, your tie to your ego loosens a little bit. That also purifies you. But I don't think I answered your question, did I? Yeah, it's involved, because karma is a very involved thing. But doing the practices does sort of sweep away some of that old karma. Yes, it's always moving, that balancing act back and forth. This lifetime, are you getting more or less? We don't normally sit down and think about it, but that does exist. It just depends on what your teachers focus on with you. But there are whole books on karma that I'm not very familiar with, so thank you. Anyone else? Yes.
I have a question. And it might be just like my personal interpretation is different. Where I don't personally, I don't interpret it as the need to not suffer or the need to erase myself in order to care exclusively about the suffering of others. I guess what my question is how could I share that in a way that's respectful, where there is more of my compassion for my own suffering matters here too. Compassion for your suffering matters here too. And because that's the real, isn't that universal compassion to include yourself?
Yes, absolutely. You can include yourself, absolutely. For both healing and also for healing.
Yeah.
Well, even when we do Medicine Buddha, people worry about doing it for themselves, and we have to do it so that we become a stronger practitioner and our body is stronger. But, you said something that really touched me. But all of this sort of happens all at the same time.
Right.
You don't have to just become a purified being and then you help others. We do this while we're still ourselves. There's like no perfect time. The perfect time is to start now. And so, but that's true. I mean, I don't worry so much about my own karma, or my own suffering as much as I used to. But sometimes suddenly you become aware you are suffering. And that's sort of what I was trying to emphasize today. But thank you so much. I'm not answering these very well, I'm sorry. So now I'm suffering. No, I'm joking. So I want you to go out of here today and realize what a blessed life you all have. I just heard this for the very first time last night, that at our center we practice Vajrayana Buddhism, and the only Buddha that will teach Vajrayana Buddhism is our Buddha, our historical Buddha. And just the fact that you came here today and you read words, you actually, the second prayer we did were actually words of the Buddha. And every statue here is filled with ashes and relics of different teachers and the Buddha. So, and every practice you do, however little, is wondrous, because not many people ever are willing to do that. Most people just want to go on with their comfortable lives and never take a moment. Today is kind of like, let's stop for a moment and have a little reality check. But at the same time, we are so blessed. When I started 35 years ago, you could never find a book like this. It was almost like the black market to find books. You know? I mean, there was no Amazon, there was no internet, and there were hardly any books translated into English back then. Because when our Tibetan teachers escaped from Tibet, a lot of them chose to carry Buddhist texts instead of food. So many died. And so you have so much here at this center that we never had when we had an earlier center. You have so many practices, so many people willing to help you. And I'm so happy that you're all coming here. So I really hope that if you just try and live a good life, don't worry about your karma, don't worry about other people's karma. Just try and live a really good life, but just care about other people. That would make my heart sing. So thank you for all being here. And let's just take a moment and we'll just dedicate all the goodness of what's in the room today. So it's the back page. It's called Dedication of Merit. We'll read both of these. I'm sorry, Don, were there any questions online? Okay, thank you. Sonam di tam che sepani tonene pedranam bamjene yegana chibala jupai sipe sole jowa sho jamba pavo chija yemadan kuntu sampo deyan dejinde Deda kungi Jesu dalochin ewa dida tamje ratungo. In English, by this merit may all attain omniscience, may it defeat the enemy of wrongdoing. From the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death, from the ocean of samsara, may I free all beings. The courageous Manjushri, who knows everything as it is, Samantabhadra, who also knows in the same way, and all the bodhisattvas, that I may follow in their path. I completely dedicate all this virtue. And my closing words are, hopefully most of you had a wonderful childhood, so you probably owe a great deal of debt in some ways to your parents, not financially. So always remember them in your prayers also. Thank you, everyone.